boys, I'm going to read a couple of chapters from the first book, the DalONCh series, The Baker Street Sports Club. This book is called The Secret Baseball Challenge. I never dreamed that last summer would be the best one of my life. Not at all. My dad's work as a road construction boss took him to Michigan, and we didn't see him for almost 3 months. My 2 little sisters, Amy and Jennifer, had to go with my mother on her babysitting job. What a babysitting job! She had to get the girls up early and leave for Chicago before I was even out of bed. For the whole summer, she babysat for some rich people's baby from 6 in the morning until 6 at night, Monday through Saturday. She and Dad had spent a lot of hours talking about whether she would even take the job and what they were going to do with me if she did. Right up until the last week before she finally took the job, I thought I would have to go with her every day. That was Dad's idea. He didn't get to play much when he was a kid, and he thought it would do the boys some good if I went with Mom and helped watch my sisters while she took care of the rich kid and did all the housework. Well, Mom felt bad enough about having to take such a horrible job, but we needed the money, and she couldn't talk the rich people into letting their baby boy stay at our place in the country. I wanted to argue, to plead and beg to be able to stay alone at home during the day, and I had all the reasons dreamed up too. But that's not how anybody talks to my dad. He doesn't get talked into things. He just decides, that's all. Actually, I think it was Mom who helped him decide on this one. She set up all the rules and asked Dad if we could try it for the first 2 weeks. He just turned 12, Bev, my dad reminded her. He's not ready to be left out here all by himself all day for the summer. Mom stood and moved to the window, staring out at our small farm. I'll make him call me twice a day, and he'll have chores. He'll have to weed the garden, pick the vegetables, do the yard work, and keep the place up. And there will be limits on where he can go. Mrs. Ferguson said he could tell her any time he goes anywhere, so I'd know how to reach him if I ever had to. My dad didn't look convinced, and I was sure he'd never allow it. What's he going to do for meals? I wanted to answer to tell him that that was the least of my worries, but I knew it would just irritate him. And anyway, I wanted to know if Mom had thought of an answer to the food problem herself. She had. He can get his own breakfast, and I'll make up his lunches and put them in the freezer. I was getting excited. I could see Dad softening. What a summer I was going to have! What freedom! Mom continued, Dallas, you know the rules. Your boundaries are Olive Street and Toboggan Road, north and south, and the highway frontage road and Baker Street, east and west. To tell you the truth, I was shocked. That gave me about a mile square. Might not sound like much, but I was expecting a lot less. All my best friends lived within that area. When your chores are done, you may have friends over, and you can play in the barn or in the shed, but you can't have more than one friend in the house with you at a time, and then, for lunch, only if they bring their own. All of a sudden, it became clear to me that Mom and Dad had quit talking about it and had begun setting down the rules for me. It was all I could do to sit still. I wanted to call Jimmy Calabrese so bad, but I didn't want to show my excitement for fear the whole deal would fade away. I don't think I fooled my dad, though, trying to take it all in stride. He was a kid once himself, and he knew. When they finally agreed that that was how it was going to be, that we would try leaving me at home during the day for the first couple of weeks of the summer, we ate dinner, and then Dad asked me to take a walk with him. Even when my dad was tired and troubled, which he was now, I liked to be around him. He was hard and tanned from working outdoors all his life, and I liked the way the summer sun kept his brown hair bleached almost yellow. His boots made scuffing sounds in the dirt in our back acres, but unless I hurried, I found myself behind him. He wore a white sleeveless pullover shirt to work every day and khaki pants that came right to the top of his boots. I made the mistake once of telling him that short pants like that weren't cool. He just stared at me for the longest time and spoke quietly. Worrying about tripping over your trouser cuffs when an earth mover's behind you ain't cool either. Not too many cool guys last long on the road, Dal. I hated it when he started calling me Dal, and I told him so. I think he tried to quit. He said he didn't do it on purpose, but that it was just what came out when he thought of me and how much he loved me. I could tell it was hard for him to say that, but every once in a while he'd say it anyway. He wanted me to know I was special, because I was his firstborn and his only boy. I guess I would have felt special whether he said it or not, because he was a good dad and everybody liked him. When we arrived at the corral, he pointed to the top of the white fence and I climbed it. I remember when I first tried to sit on that rickety thing and how he laughed when I held on for dear life. Now he sat across from me with the corner post between us. You know why this corral is empty, Dal? I nodded. Sure, 'cause you sold Lightning. You loved that horse, didn't you, boy? I nodded, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to cry. Dad had brought that horse home for me when he was a colt and I was 5. He was chestnut brown, but still I wanted to name him Silver, like the Lone Ranger's white horse. That's what I called him that first night. But there had been a storm, lots of lightning and thunder. I begged Dad to let me go out to the stable and be with Silver, but he told me the horse would never get used to the storms if we were always out there with him. So I just sat on the edge of my bed, watching the open window of the stable and seeing Silver look almost white every time the lightning flashed. I cried and cried that night, listening to him whinny and kick around. I thought my dad was pretty mean then, but by the time the storm was over, Silver had quieted down, and I had come up with a new name for him. Young as I was, I still fed and groomed Lightning every day, walking him, riding him, everything. Finally, I could speak without my voice breaking. You loved him too, Dad. He nodded. Yeah. His voice was husky. But not as much as you. You loved that horse like most boys love their dogs. He was right, and I hoped he wouldn't make me talk about it anymore. I knew it would break your heart, and that you'd never understand, and there's nothing I want to do less than hurt my boy. Selling that beautiful animal was one of the hardest things I ever had to do in my life. I looked deep into my dad's eyes. I knew some of the things he'd had to do that he didn't like, but I never figured he had them listed in order. If I wasn't so choked up, I would have asked him, but he saved me the trouble. He frowned. You probably think seeing my pa die when I was about your age was one of them. I whispered, would have been for me. Well, believe it or not, there have been tougher ones. Not that I didn't love Pa. You know I did. Taught me so much. Was such a good Christian. Still trying to live so Pa would be proud of me. There was one of those late spring breezes that made you shiver even though you could still see the sun full and low in the western sky. When my dad talked like this, I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. Of course, I was curious about those things he said were tougher for him than seeing his own father die when Dad was almost 13. His father got tangled up in some kind of farm machinery, and Dad heard him calling for help, but there was nothing that Dad could do but run for the neighbors because if his father wasn't strong enough to free himself, a young boy sure wasn't either. By the time Dad returned with help, his father was dead. It took almost all of my life to piece that together from the many times I'd heard the story. One thing I was sure of, Dad could never tell the whole story himself. It was too painful, and it didn't take a genius to know why. He had a faraway look in his eye. Losing my pa made me a better dad. At least I hope it did. All I want to be is a good dad, Del. You know that. So tough as it was, something good came of it. Who knows what kind of person I might have turned out to be if I hadn't had the memory of my pa to keep me straight. I squinted into the orange sun and turned to face my dad. I had the feeling that if I asked him what could be tougher than losing his father, he might get out of the mood for talking, and I didn't want that. I spoke carefully. I hated when you sold lightning. Dad smiled. Did you hate me? I didn't answer right away. He knew me pretty well. I had to admit it. I wasn't too thrilled with you for a while. He smiled. You hated me. You wouldn't even look at me, let alone talk to me, for 3 days. I shook my head. I would never hate you, Dad, even if I think you're wrong sometimes. Dad put his hands on the top rail on either side of him and swung his legs back and down till he stood up, looking at me. Still think I had any other choice? I looked away. Nope. I wish you could have had Grandma move in with us, but it was impossible. He had spoken quickly. I had irritated him, or at least remembering his decision had upset him. From the corner of my eye, I could tell he wasn't looking at me anymore. If there had been any way, we could have handled her, but I couldn't saddle your mother with that, with the kind of care Grandma needs. If I could take care of her myself, I would, but she's like a baby, Dallas. She can't do anything for herself. She needs professional care all day and all night. I had this feeling that I should reach down and touch Dad's shoulder and tell him I knew, that I understood, and that it was all right. But I'd never done anything like that before, and I couldn't bring myself to do it then. Dad folded his hands in front of him and sighed. Putting her in that home, as wonderful as it is, was one of those hardest things I've ever had to do, Dal. They tell me that she doesn't recognize me anymore, that she doesn't know who put her in there and won't hold any grudges as if she'd been abandoned. And I know it's true, but I'd still like to know how she cries when we visit her and cries even harder when we leave. He thought a long while and pawed at the ground with the toe of his boot. Only one other thing was hard as having to do that. Dad didn't seem to want to talk anymore. Bugs started biting, and it was getting darker. But I would have sat out there with him all night just to find out what that other toughest thing was that he had to do. Tougher even than seeing his own pa die. And there's the end of the first chapter, boys. We'll read some more next time. I love you. Bye.